Your learning can lead to sinful enticement.
And we're reading here in Revelations chapter 2, verse 14. It says, "Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some of you who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality."
So as we see here, following Jesus' commendation of the Christians in Pergamum, he proceeds to address some of their mistakes that they had made.
That's right. You know, the Pergamum church, and really all of us, the focus is not just on the good that we do, but also on our entire lives, our successes
And our
and our mistakes.
Yeah, just because we've done something good and it doesn't make up for the mistakes we make in a different area of our life, right?
That's false doctrine. And that type of thinking would kind of support the good works, right, for the removal of wrongdoing.
That's right. Jesus makes it clear that he does not ignore our wrongdoings because we did something right in another place. And so, he doesn't punish us for the wrong things because we're forgiven. At the same time, if we think that we're going to do sinful things and wrongful things over here and not be repentant for them, instead we're going to turn around and put a little more money in the tithe plate, or we're going to do more activities to cover it up.
Wash it
No,
away.
that is wrong theology and the wrong way to think about all of this.
That's right. Wrongdoing and sin are harmful to
Yeah.
us, and he shows his love and concern for us by being truthful.
Jesus is modeling a behavior that we should all have when working with each other, and that is we should take the time to connect with one another, commend one another, and encourage one another, right?
Right, and give truth and love. And only then we can move into correcting one another in the areas that
Absolutely.
are needed.
We see Jesus mention a prophet by the name of Balaam, who was a prophet that was in the Old Testament.
Right, you know, Balaam is famous. You know him by having been rebuked by his donkey
Yeah.
when they encountered a large angel while traveling on the road.
In the story, Balaam was asked by Balak to prophesy against the children of Israel, but Balaam makes it clear to Balak that he can only give the words given by God, which then continued on in the scriptures to show that God continued to bless the children of Israel in this particular story through Balaam, and it kind of really upsets Balak, and so that kind of story is kind of the famous one because the donkey turns around and gets a little snarky and smart with Balaam because he's not really kind of doing what God wanted him to at the time.
I'd love to have seen that, you know. And sometime later, actually, Balaam is said to have given advice that caused the Israelites to commit sexual sin with a Moabite woman.
Right now in the New Testament, we see the Jerusalem Council also warn Christians about avoiding sexual immorality and idolatry.
That's right. Here's what it reads in Acts chapter 15, verse 29. He said, "You are to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do well to avoid these things."
Right. You may be thinking that this is an ancient concern only, but even today, sexual sin and idolatry continue to be an issue for us.
What God is concerned about is when we let anything in our lives become more of a focus and celebration than the mission of the gospel.
God is not concerned with food and eating and drinking here, but rather when we decide that something in our lives is
Could be
more
anything.
important than the gospel in our lives. And so we need to realize here, he doesn't really care about what you're eating. There's some motive behind it here.
Exactly. You know, and these important things in our lives can really become so important
Right.
that they exclude God from being an integral part of these events.
You know what? And that could exactly be what's happening in Pergamum at the time. It's not that they were more sinful and confused and they were more knowledgeable or less knowledgeable than us. And so we need to get out of this thinking that, well,
not
they
much
were
has
they were
changed.
just not sophisticated enough to get the gospel. That was not it at all.
Well, and no doubt the topic of sexual immorality is pretty similar, whether a part of an ancient ceremony or two consenting adults after a late night at work. But sexual sin is sin when it's outside the marriage between a man and a woman.
Right, and when it's not between a man and a woman at all, it's also considered sin.
True.
All right, now the message from the Jerusalem Council and the letter to the believers in Pergamum are instructions and warning for us as well. So let's keep this in mind.
And Jesus goes on further to warn the believers in Pergamum that they have people who are following the teachings of the Nicolaitans.
All right, and it goes on to say that in Revelation chapter 2, verse 15, where it says, "Likewise, you have those who hold to the teachings of the Nicolaitans."
That's right. Now, it's not entirely clear what the teachings and the practices of the Nicolaitans were, but what is clear is that Jesus says he hates the practices of the Nicolaitans.
Now, some scholars think the teachings of the Nicolaitans have to do with sexual immorality and idolatry.
And others think that it's the consolidation of power and authority over the early Christian church, reducing the autonomy of local assemblies.
What we should all be careful to do is to follow Jesus' teachings, which starts out by reading and understanding the Bible, and in particular, Jesus' life, ministry, and teachings, and making sure that we know that if someone comes along and they start teaching something that's contrary or a spin on it, that you can go, well, that doesn't sound quite right. I'm going to go check the Bible against all of that, and it's okay to do that, and it's what we should be doing.
Thank you for joining Les and Tracy King for A Word on the Word. Visit awordontheword.tv to receive their latest audio or video broadcast. A Word on the Word is sponsored by First Century Ministry